Hi, this is Harish Shetty. I lead the engineering team at Workato. I think we did few product hours about a month ago, and then I think we switched the format a little bit. So today we're back to the one of the original styles that we wanted to try. Anyways, so the databases, here is a kind of brief overview of different databases that we, provide support for. Primarily, you can, you can say that there are pre-built connectors for the databases that we provide out of the box. Mainly relational databases and data warehouses and document databases. So Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, and SQL Server, we provide support for them out of the box. And then this week we are coming up with a new adapter. That's a JDBC adapter that should allow us to connect to any data source that supports JDBC. So the number of databases that we can connect to is increasing, every week. Can we go to the next slide? We show this slide in every one of our product hours, but just so that we can situate ourselves, I will go over this slide for a few minutes. Essentially, as you know, within Workato, we got triggers and actions. So triggers are the place where you're informing Workato, saying that, okay, when this event happens, you want to do an action. In the context of the database connectors, you could classify the triggers into two categories: poll triggers and schedule triggers. In case of poll trigger, you're saying that every 5 minutes you want to check orders table for any new orders. Or in case of schedule trigger, what you're saying is every week on Monday at 10 p.m. you want to sync all the rows that are there in the users table onto Salesforce, let's say. So those two mechanisms we support. And when it comes to actually dispatching the data when the event happens, let's say polling event or the schedule event happens, there are two modes in which you can configure the dispatch mechanism. So we can dispatch single row at a time, or we can dispatch batch or bulk, multiple rows at a time. So again, the type of dispatch mechanism depends upon your business, your use case rather. So if you're doing a bulk sync, then you might actually choose bulk dispatch mode. But if there is certain business logic associated with the individual row, I mean, whenever a new order is placed, you want to perform a set of business functions, then you probably might choose a single row at a time. And actions themselves, we support the standard CRUD operations, that is being create, update, delete, and upsert. And in case of database adapters, we support stored procedures and custom SQL also. Can we go to the next slide? So today's session is, again, generally structured around various use cases that we have seen for the database when it comes to database connectors. So one of the default use cases that we've seen is you're doing a real time, or you're doing a single event sync. As I was discussing earlier, let's say whenever there is a lead that was added to, and that is added to, let's say, your database, for whatever reason, you have database as the primary source of truth in specific scenarios, and whenever a row is added, you want to replicate it, and you want to perform certain business logic before you replicate it into other sources. So then you got the single event replication. Then you got the batch processing, where in which you have large volumes of data, and you want to move from database to another database to, let's say, Salesforce, maybe Salesforce back to database. So in this case, you might be syncing maybe 1,000 rows at a time, because you might want to sync millions of rows in total. And when other option is when you're syncing, you need to enrich the data from multiple sources. So data might originate in Salesforce, but before you deposit the data in your let's say in your database or in your data warehouse store, you have to enrich the data. So the enrichment might come from various systems of record. In this case, it might it might be Salesforce, it might be Workday, it might be NetSuite and whatnot. But Workato acts as the data enrichment middleware before the data is put into the database. And of course, then you got store procedures, and we will cover the use cases for that, how to invoke store procedures, and how generally we work with the store procedures. Then we will also talk about the distinction between connecting to a database that is hosted on the cloud, that is, if a database is accessible on the internet via maybe IP whitelisting or whatnot, or if the database is running inside your network and behind your firewall, how do we access it? What is the technique that we use and what you have to do? We'll cover that aspect also. Now I'm going to give the control to Ishan. Ishan, can you take over?
Hi, thanks Harish. Hi, this is Ishan. I'm based out of Singapore, joining this product hour from Singapore. Just some background, I'm in the product management team, and like Triti said, my area of focus is around database connectors. So for the first scenario that we want to show today, we want to show a very popular and use case that our customers that we see our customers use. This essentially is a very simple use case. It's based around CRM, moving data from CRM source into your database. This, of course, our example here uses the opportunity object, but it could very easily be changed to a lead or a customer from any other CRM source. And in this use case, we're actually performing an upsert operation, which is actually a special kind of action that handles both insert and update, all in a single action. So without further ado, let me show you how this scenario can be built from scratch in a very simple way. This is actually almost just a two-step action. Here from a blank recipe, I'm gonna first go and choose my CRM source. In this case, I'm gonna pick Salesforce. And great, the opportunity trigger is already recommended for me, so I'm just gonna click through. I'll pick a connection for this demo. Now, I'm just gonna skip through at this point to get to the main recipe page.
Hey, Ishan, so what connection did you choose there for Salesforce?
So I chose a connection that it's connected to my Salesforce instance.
Oh, so you already had this connection. You had this way. Okay.
This was a pre-existing connection. So the Workato recipe recognized that I had more than one connection to Salesforce. So it gave me the list and asked me to choose the specific one that I want to use in this case. And that's important because different connection can point to different Salesforce instances with a different set of custom objects, fields, and whatnot. So at this point, for the sake of the demo, let's say I want to pick all records that is in my Salesforce instance. So I'm going to pick all records that were created or updated since the beginning of time. Now, to further optimize my trigger, I'm gonna say I'm only gonna use a selected set of fields from the entire list of fields available from the opportunity object from Salesforce. And this basically helps to keep my recipe very concise. So when I'm looking at job details and troubleshooting, the list of fields that I see is narrowed down, more focused. So in this case, I know I want the opportunity ID, my account ID, and probably want my name, the opportunity name. Stage is pretty important to me, amount, and also this. And if this list gets too big, we provide a feature to kind of filter down by typing. Um, you know, and we perform matching, searching criteria to narrow down the set of fields that you can see. So in this case, I want 2 dates, both the created date as well as the last modified date. So this point, I'm happy with field selection.
So Ishan, so what, I mean, if you don't choose the fields, what happens?
Yes, that's a good question. When this input field is left blank, the default behavior is the trigger is going to return you all the fields.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the reason for choosing the field is if you want to optimize the result set, right? I mean, in here we probably could have done without choosing the field, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And there is one other question that I had. I think you were talking about beginning of time. One of the advantage, one aspect of that, is when you want to do a sync. So typically, when you're doing sync, there is a the sync that you have to do to set up the data in the beginning, and then on the ongoing basis you need to continue to apply the updates. I guess you could do the same thing using both of the use cases using the same recipe, right? If you do the beginning of time.
Yes. So with beginning of time, we're basically going backwards to pick up all records, and the trigger will continue to pick up all these records till we hit the present time, and any records to be created or updated in the future would the recipe will carry on picking them up. So it's kind of like an extended timeline backwards and any time forward.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so at this point, the trigger is completely set up. We're ready to go. The next step and final step is just I'm gonna load it into a SQL Server database instance, and a typical use case from a customer would to perform some form of logic to deduplicate and to ensure no duplicate records are inserted into your database. We typically would see a user say, let's search for this record based on some matching fields, and based on the results set, say if it's present, we do an update on the existing row, or we insert a new row if the search returns nothing. But in this case, we have a really nifty action called the upsert row action. This action is special because it conditionally does an insert or an update based on the presence of a row. And the action, how the action actually determines if this row is present is based on a user specified unique key. And how this works is like this. So I'm just going to pick a connection that I had before. And first, I'll select a table that I like to work with. In this case, I want to go with the opportunity table. This is almost a replica of the Salesforce object. Now, back to what I was talking about with the unique key. Now, this field is a pick list of all the fields that are available from the table that I just selected. This list of fields are dynamically generated. So all fields from any table, it will change based on the selection of your table. Now in this case, I'm going to pick the ID column as the unique key. So what this does is say when we send this entire row to the database, it's going to do a check. Say if a row with this value in the ID column exists, perform an update, and if not, we're going to insert the row. So here I'm going to select all columns for mapping. So account ID goes here, amount, and you'll notice because we narrow down the field, it becomes much easier to perform the mapping process. Some of our users have large outputs with many fields, and it can be a challenging task just simply to map them. So that's where restricting the number of fields that show up in the output can come in handy. So at this point, the action is complete, and our recipe is complete. This integration use case is done. So typically, users like to save, and you can run a test, make sure that everything comes through properly. We see one job was picked up, of course, because we are going back in time, and all record was picked up and sent to database. Now let's look at the job detail. So what we're going to see here is that the output is restricted to the number of the specific fields that I've selected at the start, and this helps to keep the logs clean and simple to understand. Of course, these are data that were passed, and a row was successfully sent in. Yeah, and so the point of this example is to show how easy it can be to use a database action, almost a special compound action like an upsert to keep your recipe building recipe design simple. A two-step recipe can handle deduplication logic, time, moving back in time, and kind of from all kinds of mapping.
Ishan, so I saw that you mapped some of the date fields and all. So who is responsible for the type conversion there?
Oh, that is a great question. So I believe you're talking about the created timestamp and the modified timestamp. Yeah. So in Workato, we introspect the tables and the column types for each column in a table. So type conversions, in this case, like date time conversions or timestamps, that is all done by the database connector. So in this case, the SQL Server would recognize that this is a date time field. It automatically does a conversion. So a date format that comes from Salesforce would typically not match the date time format that SQL Server expects. But the database connectors in Workato does this conversion automatically and formats them in a way that would not throw an error back from the database. Okay. So and that's evidenced here where all we did was a simple mapping, and the row was upserted very cleanly, so that there's no need for additional date time manipulation, format manipulation from the user's perspective.
And this database that you connected, was it an on-prem database, or was it something that you?
Mhm. So this connection, I used a direct connection.
Okay.
So not an on-prem one.
Okay.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, uh, yeah.
Ishan, we have a question.
Yeah.
So if you scroll down, like the list of tables or objects that showed up, like when I say, so the question is like, what what is contained in this list? How does Workato fetch this list? And the second question is, does it also include views or is it only tables?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So this list is generated uh, from, it's a list of all tables and views from the connected database instance. So in my case, I've connected to SQL Server at the root level. So these are all tables that are accessible to the credentials I use. This is the SQL Server connector go sends a request to your database to pick up to introspect all tables available, and populates this list for us. So as you can see, tables are available and also views. So yeah, both tables and views are supported in such actions.
Okay. Ishan, there was a question here. What is the difference between on-prem connector and direct connector? So answer to that is, for the user, there is no different. It's really the difference at the connection level. When you're specifying the connection to the database, you say that, okay, I'm going through I'm connecting to an on-prem database. So that we later in the session we have a section where we talk about what exactly is meant by that. But your recipe, your actions, they look the same. There is no difference. So they behave. It's the same connector for all practical purposes. They behave the same.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll move on to the next use case that we want to talk about, and this is the batch processing that Harish was talking about earlier, in the dispatch mode, that the other dispatch mode that is supported. So this use case, typically we recommend using batch triggers, batch actions when you're looking to improve throughput and in your integration scenario. This loading in bulk really enhances your performance in terms of how fast you want to send a large set of data across. So we have a particular customer looking to sync 1 million records from Salesforce into a database, and using a batch action actually increased, help increase the speed by 10 times. It was 10 times faster, and the performance difference is really significant in terms of time. So batch processing is very useful in cases where a large data set is needed to be moved. And typically this is, the use case is around a periodic sync where, you are loading a week's worth of records or rows all at once. So that's where we want to move in batches. So I've prepared a recipe that does just this. So what we notice is that the recipe actually looks really similar to what we've just built earlier. This looks essentially the same. The trigger says it's still a new / updated opportunity from Salesforce, except in this case we're using the batch mode. So this dispatch is batch or in bulk. So in this case, we're sending actually a batch. Each trigger event comes in a batch, and this batch size is variable, can be defined. It goes up to as large as 2,000 records at once. At the same time, yeah.
Ishan, so this 2,000 record limit, what is the reason for that?
So this 2,000 record limit is essentially just to make sure that when users are dealing with moving batches of data, we don't want this limit to be too large. And
because if I remember correctly, there was a restriction on the Salesforce end that says what is the maximum the row set that you can query, because I remember us having set that limit, that number based on that.
Yes, and it's more than that, it's also the number of columns when we deal with the batch size. So there is typically a size limit. So if we're dealing with a larger object, actually, this batch size could be significantly smaller than 2,000. Yeah. So restriction is then based around that.
Ishan, there's a question from Kenny. Where is the batch size configured? If we have a batch of 10,000 records, would it process 2,000 or then wait 5 minutes, then do another 2,000? Or how does it work?
That's a great question. So batch size is actually configured as part of the trigger input. I've used 100 here, but we can go up and up to 2,000. So back to your question, the question about, say, if I have 10,000 records and I've configured this to the maximum size of 2,000, the trigger would actually poll all 10,000 and process them in batches of 2,000. So there would be 5 batches. But the time interval between each batch is actually immediate. The trigger doesn't wait 5 minutes before the next set of 2,000 runs through. So all 10,000 records are processed in sequence, one after the other, but immediately with no time interval between.
So Ishan, to summarize, it's part of the same job, right?
It's not part of the same job. In this case, 5 jobs will be scheduled one after another. That is, if the concurrency of the recipe is 1, then it will be you got these 5 batches will be processed in sequence. So, but there is no time delay between each batch. But if you, let's think of a scenario in which, let's think of a scennario that where you want to process it, make it even more faster. Then you could enable the enable concurrency. Then at any moment in time, 4 batches will be in action. Of course, there is a problem of database contention. Especially if you're going the other direction, from database to Salesforce, there is an issue of database contention, locked rows, and also the concurrency and the batch size. Probably there is 1 or 2 iterations that the user has to try before arriving at the right number, because it totally depends upon the source and destination applications that are used in the recipe.
Hey, Ishan, a follow-up question from Kenny. This is a good one, which is if a user inadvertently put more than 2,000, right? So will the recipe fail? Like, what would be the repercussion of that? Or do we provide a warning if you try to put more than 2,000?
Good question. So because it's not uncommon for users not to see this. The warning. So when the batch size is set past the maximum batch size that we've imposed, the recipe wouldn't fail for sure. But at the back, we actually bring down this limit to our maximum batch size. So any number above would be dropped, and the maximum will be used.
So when you say dropped, basically in number above 2000 is, still the batch size is set to 2000. That's what you mean, right?
Yeah. It defaults back to 2000.
Yeah. Okay.
Brings it down. That's a good question, though. Yeah, it happens. And also to add to Harish's point, some the destination app, destination place where your information flows to really also affects the batch size that you can handle. So in certain cases like SQL Server, uploading data in batches, there's actually a placeholder limit of like 2000, 2100 placeholder limit. So typically the batch size, when thinking about working with a particular batch size, it really is a trial and error process. That iterate through and find out where's this limit, how high can this batch size go to optimize performance where it doesn't break any size limits. Great. So if there are no other questions, I'm going to move on to the next scenario, which is working with multiple data sources. So in this case, what we want to showcase is the ability to use custom SQL in the event that a typical select action won't work in your case. So this custom SQL select action allows users to perform complex joins, complex queries like with join statements, with subqueries, though with multiple tables at once. This is useful because it's more optimal than using multiple select actions in a single recipe, and that just kind of slows it down. So and also if you have your own custom SQL, this becomes a perfect action for you. All you need to do is copy and paste it, and you can just run your query. So I prepared a recipe here, and this recipe is kind of an extension to the use case that we've seen earlier. What we've seen our users, they want is an ability to say, okay, I have this. I'm moving data from my CRM source into my database instance. Now I want to, because my database is a central hub for all my information, from my inventory management system, service management system. At some point, whenever an opportunity comes in, I want a database to update my CRM source with some data about the inventory, the quantity left for a particular product, especially when an opportunity uses too much, right? So in this case, what the use case that we're seeing is, say, hey, I wanna pick out all. I want to find out for this this opportunity that was just closed, for all these products that were required, that were part of this opportunity, how many of them are there left? And I want to take this information and post it back to my CRM, just to make sure if any particular product runs out, or it's getting low in quantity, we want to get everyone to be aware of that. So here we're actually performing a very simple join query between the opportunity and of course the inventory table. What we see here actually is really interesting, is the ability, not just to have a statically defined query, but the ability to map data pills into your SQL query. That in this case, every run of a job, we're actually dynamically assigning a value into your query. So we're picking up new sets of data, and not just the same set of data every time. So we're actually optimizing this and pulling a much more focused data set to be used. Also, this custom SQL action kind of inspects the SQL that the user provides and generates the output schema, automatically, as we've seen here. The output schema is defined on the fly whenever a user provides the SQL. So it really becomes much more convenient action, and it becomes a copy and paste and just map. Yeah. And of course, at the end of it, we update product information with quantity as well as the latest description back into your CRM to keep all parts of your business in sync.
Ishan, we probably should go a little bit faster because I think we have only 10 minutes, and then we have question time. So
great. Yeah. So the last thing I want to show here is this stock procedures feature, and so this what this does is some of the use case that's involved here is ability to perform some predefined functions in your database or some procedure at a specific time. So in the use case that we're seeing here is, say, I want to sync my workers from my HR application into a database on a daily basis. In this case, we want to send it at midnight every day. So first, of course, this is also a batch dispatch mode. So we're dealing with different batches. So in this case, we use an Oracle database. We're actually sending data in batches to optimize performance. Now, the business logic here is, say, so once we hit the last batch and we're essentially done with syncing worker data for this day, I want to execute a particular stop procedure in my database, kind of to say, okay, I want to log that today's sync was successful and store it in my audit table. So, and stop procedure action is the perfect operation for that. We see here, similar to how we generate the list of tables, this is Oracle database. We actually introspect your instance and generate a list of all stock procedures at the root level, as well as functions that are defined in your database. Of course, and we see that we actually introspect your stock procedure and say, find out the input arguments that are any input arguments required from this stock procedure. We define it and expose them as input fields to be used. Okay, so in the interest of time, Harish, why don't you tell us more about securing database connections?
Ishan, before we jump onto that, there was a question. I think most of the triggers that we looked at were from applications. So the question pertains to if it's a database trigger, like how does beginning of time work, right? Or like when you're fetching data from back in time, do you need to use parameters to specify last modified date greater than this, or any other way to specify, or how does Workato handle that?
That's a great question. So with database triggers in particular, let's say we use the SQL Server example.
No, we got the batch. Ishan, the batch rows probably.
Yeah. So yeah, let's say we're using the batch trigger. In this case, of course, first we pick a table we want to work with. Then with triggers to identify that is a unique record and say, okay, this is a particular event that happened. Say a new row was inserted into the table, or a new row was updated to this table. What we want to do is say, okay, the unique key for this table is the ID column, and this In this case, is actually the primary key table. And next, what I want to do is define the sort column, meaning, okay, how do I identify that this record is modified? So in this case, the timestamp is used together with a unique key to identify updated records.
So I guess the one question the question that was asked in the channel was, do they need to provide the an updated date? I guess in this trigger we take care of everything. We take care of maintaining the cursor to know that what was the last point that we have read.
Yeah.
So all you need to supply is a table and the configuration about what is the primary key and what is the timestamp field. Yeah.
Yes, and also just to add a little more, if there's a requirement to go back in time, or back to a specific time, or forward to a specific time, the where condition is an optional statement also that the user can use. You say I want to say only pick up records with last modified date after a certain period of time, say beginning of the year. So this is how you can also filter records based on like how the Salesforce connector says go back in time.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, Harish, why don't you take us through this slide?
Can you go to the next slide? Okay. Basically, typically in an integration scenario, you might have database as in two different locations, two types of location. In one case, you might have databases within your firewall, and it is not exposed. Workato cannot access it directly. So in those situations, you have to run a software called on-prem agent on a machine within your firewall. So on-prem agent essentially enables our recipes to talk to your database. Good thing about the on-prem agent is you don't have to open any firewall ports within your network. So when the agent is running on your machine, it makes an outbound connection, and then we use that outbound connection as a way to communicate back into your database. So the actual communication between the agent and Workato is encrypted, and there is we provide a pair of certificates. So every agent has a unique set of certificates. So the entire communication is secure and encrypted. But there is another family of databases. Let's say you're running your database on Amazon, and there's actually a public IP address using which we can connect to it. So, but at the same time, you want to make sure that not everybody is able to connect to it. So you could actually whitelist our IP addresses, and that way you can restrict access to your database. Earlier, there was a question about what is the difference between on-prem, difference between the difference from the user's perspective, when it comes to accessing on-prem database versus, let's say cloud accessible database. Ishan, can you show us a connection where we are actually accessing the on-prem database?
Yeah. So this slide shows that I'm using an on-prem connection. So in this case, I said, okay, this is in a private network. I'm using this on-prem agent that I've installed in my machine.
Can you show us the on-prem agent configuration screens?
Yep. So this is where you can see your on-prem agents. This is the particular one that I was using.
Mm-hmm.
you can see the various profiles that I've defined in my on-prem agent. So but one single agent is able to connect to multiple profiles, and each profile points to a particular database instance that we connect to.
So then where are you, in your connection itself, I didn't see any username and password or any details about, how you're going to connect to the database. So where are you supplying these credentials?
Yeah. So this credentials are actually stored in my OPA configuration file. So all username, password, kind of like database names, schema names, these are all stored securely within a server behind my firewall. So there's no need for me to provide credentials directly to Workado. This all lives within my protected network.
Okay, I guess if you have a sensitive system and database, right, in this case, and if you don't want to store the credentials of that in Workado, then this is one way to handle it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now can we switch back to the connection? So you have declared a profile. You have an agent. Within the agent, you have configured a connection to Oracle, and here you are specifying. Say Oracle product is the connection profile that you configured on. Okay. Is it possible for you to show the config file, the YML file where you configured Oracle product?
Yeah. You can see, here, this is where, I keep the on-prem agent, and the config file, is this. I hope this shows up on the screen. Yeah. It can be very easily defined here.
Okay, and there was a question in the channel about how the agent itself, is. Are you running the agent in the console, or are you running it as a service?
Right now I'm running it on my console, but in other OS, for example, the Windows OS, it can be run as a service. So
I think even in the Linux-based platforms, you can run it as a service.
Yeah.
But can you show the console? There was one.
Yeah.
I think.
So this is where the agent is running. What we see is over here. We see this is the profile that I selected, and it performed some request to pull all columns from a particular table.
Yeah. Okay. And when the agent is running, can we actually see all the state of the agent on our end? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. So let me just very quickly demonstrate connecting, and what we're going to see is some network requests happening and logging of various tasks when I click connect. So I'm going to quickly switch back here and see some requests were made from Workado's secure gateway through the firewall to this on-prem agent to ensure that this profile name is valid, all credentials supplied in my configuration file is valid, and sends confirmation that connection is successful.
And I was asking more from the Workado UI, because this might be running somewhere in your data center, right? And it's not necessary that you might have logged onto that machine to see what's going on. But can you, from the Workado UI, can you see whether the agent is running or not?
Yeah. So one way to see that is in your on-prem agent page. This is an indicator that your agent is running on your server, and it's actively running. At the same time, we can see additional information like the version number, and we can click through to when it was installed and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Harish, there's one question that I hear quite often from our users. If my server loses connectivity for certain period of time, what happens to the agent? Does it come back on automatically, or do I have to restart the service?
No, it will come back on automatically. It will reestablish the connection.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, if you have some recipes that ran during that time, they will, some jobs that ran during that time, those jobs will fail. But typically, that's where the rerunning of jobs comes into picture. So you could rerun those failed jobs, and you can, if they are, if you're doing a traditional upsert scenario, let's say your earlier scenario where in which you picked up when you were updating few opportunities database, you had a glitch in the database, and then you'll see that let's say two jobs have failed. So you could go back and rerun those two jobs, and then you're back to where you were.
Okay. Hey, folks, thanks again. Just take a minute to give us some feedback on how this product hour was useful for you. And it seems like there's a lot more for us to talk about around databases. So we may have a sequel to this at a later point in time. If you have suggestions on what other use cases we should include, or specific recipes, details that you want to look at, send us an email as well at success@workato.com. Harish, while we folks respond to the poll, the on-prem agent, the code, that looked a bit scary, but that's not something end user of Workato will see, right? That's a background process that's
yeah. So typically what happens is it's a one-time thing that you might install and activate, and within your team you might have your recipe developer. So from the recipe developer perspective, you don't have to do anything different. So you're on a day-to-day basis, you're interacting with it as though it's a database that you can connect on, let's say, using an IP address. So on-prem agent kind of shields you from those complexities.
Okay.
And the cool thing about on-prem agent is, of course, database is one of the use cases, but you could have let's say you could you have a internal service that is exposed via a REST interface. So then you'll be able to access it from the recipe. So anything that you have, if you combine it with for example, we have a on-prem file adapter also. So any resource that you have within your network, you can now, you'll be able to write a business process, and you'll be able to access it securely. Because quite often, in an organization, it's not like, your systems, you got a hybrid system, right? Some systems are running within the network, and some are outside, but your business processes kind of spans across.
Right.
So once you set this up, it's quite seamless.
Okay. So Ishan, we have a minute, so you'll have to answer this really fast. The where condition, how can I execute a location that is not always consistent? I think it's essentially like how, if you can go to the trigger where condition or the action where condition, like how can you essentially do some pattern matching?
I think we can send a
response back.
Yeah.
Jasmine, we'll have to take this one with you after this call. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us in this product hour. Hopefully you found this useful, and we'll meet you again in 2 weeks on 10th of May to talk about NetSuite integrations. Do go back to product.workato.com to view this webinar on demand, maybe on Monday or Tuesday. Thanks, and have a great week.